All right, let's jump right into one of the most powerful chapters in the entire Bible, Romans chapter 1. The Apostle Paul lays out two huge parallel revelations. One is about incredible hope, and the other, well, it's about a very sobering reality. Together, they really frame the entire human story. So let's break it down.
This verse right here, this is the key that unlocks everything else. You have to picture Rome, a city that worshipped raw military power. A message about a crucified Savior would have sounded, weak, foolish even. But Paul says, I am not ashamed. Why? Because he knew the gospel wasn't just another philosophy. It was the unveiling of God's actual power.
To get his confidence, you really have to see how he saw himself. Paul calls himself a doulos, which means a bondslave of Jesus Christ. Now, to our modern ears, that might sound pretty demeaning, right? But for Paul, it was a badge of absolute honor. It meant his life wasn't his anymore. He was completely sold out, devoted to his master, and that meant his authority came directly from a divine calling, not his own ambition. So what is this gospel he's been called to preach? Well, it all centers on Jesus Christ, who perfectly bridges two realities. On the one hand, he was completely human, a flesh and blood descendant of King David, which fulfilled centuries of prophecy. But on the other hand, he was declared to be the Son of God, a claim that was proven not just by words, but by the universe-altering power of his resurrection from the dead.
You know, the word Paul uses for power here is the Greek word dunamis. It's where we get our word dynamite. Think about that. He's saying the gospel isn't just a nice idea or a self-help program. No, it is the explosive, world-shattering power of God himself unleashed for our salvation. It's literally the only force in the universe that can break the chains of sin and bring a human heart from death to life.
So how exactly does this power work? Paul says that in the gospel, a perfect righteousness from God is revealed. And this is so important. This isn't a righteousness we try to earn through good deeds. It's God's own perfect standard, given to us as a totally free gift. And the only way to get it is from faith to faith. It starts with faith, it continues by faith, and it finishes in faith. That's it.
Okay, so that's the first huge revelation, the incredible, fantastic news of God's power and righteousness available to us. But right here, Paul makes a really sharp turn, because to truly get why the good news is so unbelievably good, you first have to understand the bad news. Why do we need this explosive, saving power in the first place?
And here it is, the second great revelation of Romans 1. In the same way God's righteousness is revealed, so is his wrath against human sin. You can't really grasp one without the other. And notice what the problem is here. It's not that people don't have the truth, it's that they actively suppress it. They hold it down.
Now, it is absolutely crucial that we understand what the Bible means by God's wrath. This is not some divine temper tantrum or God just losing his cool. It's described as God's settled, holy, and perfectly just opposition to evil, the necessary reaction of a perfect, good creator against anything and everything that corrupts and destroys what he has made.
But you might ask, how can anyone be held responsible? Paul's argument is that God hasn't hidden himself at all. In fact, he's given every single person two unmistakable witnesses. First, there's the internal witness, that moral compass, that deep down sense in every heart that there is a God and that there are standards of right and wrong. And second, there's the external witness. Just look around. The sheer power, beauty, and intricate design of the world all points to an intelligent, divine creator.
And this leads to Paul's very stark conclusion. Because of this clear, universal revelation, both inside of us and outside of us, no one can stand before God and honestly claim they didn't know. The argument is that all of humanity is left completely without excuse.
Okay, let's trace this. The text lays out this tragic downward spiral, and you have to see where it begins. It doesn't start with ignorance. It starts with a choice. It says, when they knew God, they made two fatal mistakes. They didn't glorify him as God, and they weren't thankful. That ingratitude led to pointless thinking, which darkened their hearts. That darkness then bred this intellectual pride, where, professing to be wise, they became fools. And what's the ultimate foolishness? Idolatry, trading the infinite, glorious Creator for a cheap imitation.
And here we see this terrifying consequence. 3 times in this chapter, Paul repeats this phrase. Now, this isn't God actively pushing people into sin. It's more of a passive judgment. It's like God saying, you insist on rejecting me? Okay.
He withdraws his restraining grace and lets people have what they are so determined to get, starting with impurity.
And that withdrawal continues. As a direct result of idolatry, trading the truth of God for a lie, we see that human relationships start to mirror that same brokenness. They begin to turn away from the Creator's natural design.
And then there's the final stage of this judgment. Because they willfully chose to reject the knowledge of God, he gives them over to something that will corrupt everything else, a mind that just doesn't work the way it was designed to.
The result of this final judgment is what the Bible calls a reprobate mind. It's a mind that has become worthless, rejected, and has literally lost its ability to tell right from wrong. Imagine your phone's GPS, but it doesn't just give you the wrong directions. It loses the ability to tell north from south at all. That internal moral compass God gave everyone, it's now completely shattered.
So what does a society run by these kinds of minds look like? Paul just unleashes this devastating list. I mean, it's a catalog of human brokenness, covering our attitudes, our actions, our relationships. And the text really stresses, we shouldn't read this and think about those people out there. No, this is a mirror. It shows the potential of any human heart that's separated from the grace of God.
And this is the terrifying climax. The text argues that even with that broken moral compass, people still know deep down that these actions are wrong and that they deserve judgment. But they not only do them anyway, they have pleasure in those who do them. They applaud and celebrate the very behaviors they know are destructive. The conscience has been totally seared over.
So after all that, what are we supposed to do with these two massive revelations? Well, the chapter leaves us with two incredibly practical takeaways. First, be bold. The gospel is not weak. It's the dunamis, the dynamite power of God. It's the world's only real hope, so we should never be ashamed of it. And second, be thankful. Just remember, that whole downward spiral began with a simple lack of thankfulness. An actively grateful heart is a guarded heart. And so we're left with this question. We've seen the glorious, explosive power of the gospel, and we've seen the sobering reality of a world that has turned its back on its creator. So faced with these two truths, what's your response going to be? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.